Let's talk about something that is just incredibly painful and honestly really confusing for so many people. We're going to get into what happens when a child who, loved a parent suddenly completely rejects them, and there's no obvious reason why. It feels impossible, it feels isolating, but understanding what's going on under the surface, the actual science of it, can be a huge first step.
So this is the question, right? The one that just breaks your heart. How can a bond that was so strong just disappear? And your first instinct, anyone's first instinct, is to think, what did I do wrong? It must be my fault. We're wired to look for a simple reason, and that usually leads straight to blaming ourselves. But what's really happening here is so much more complicated, and to really get it, we have to look way deeper than that. So, for this explainer, let's just take the whole idea of blame and set it off to the side for a minute. Instead, we're going to look at this through the lens of biology and developmental science. Because what if this isn't a choice the child is making at all? What if it's actually a deep, unconscious survival strategy, a biological response to a totally impossible situation that's just gone terribly, terribly wrong?
Okay, section one. So, what is actually happening beneath the surface here? When a child just pushes a parent away for seemingly no reason, what does the science tell us about the invisible damage that's being done?
Okay, so the first thing we really need to wrap our heads around is this concept called attachment suppression. A child's attachment system, that's their hardwired biological need to bond with a parent. It's literally about survival. Now, even in really tough family situations, this system almost never just shuts off. So for it to completely power down towards a parent they once loved, well, as the research says, it's biologically aberrant. That's a scientific way of saying it's a massive red flag. It tells us something is profoundly wrong in that child's world.
And this is fascinating because it shows you just how different this is from normal kid behavior. It is 100% normal for your kid to be furious with you one minute, saying, "I'm so mad," but they still love you. They can hold both feelings at once. That's healthy. But in this state of psychological harm, the child's brain just can't do that. It flips into this very primitive, black and white thinking called splitting. One parent becomes the perfect saint, and the other becomes the absolute villain. There is zero middle ground.
So, to really identify this specific kind of harm, mental health professionals look for a very specific trifecta of symptoms, all happening at the same time. First, you've got that attachment suppression we just talked about. The bond is just switched off. Second, the child starts showing traits that seem to come out of nowhere, like a shocking lack of empathy or this intense sense of entitlement. And third, the child and one parent share a delusional belief that the other parent is evil or dangerous. When you see those three things together, you know you're dealing with a very specific and very serious problem. And this is just so critical to understand. This is not just about hurt feelings. It's not about a child being difficult. This is a biological response to an impossible situation. The constant pressure of being caught in the middle creates something scientists call toxic stress. And it's not just a feeling, it actually leaves a physical mark on a child's developing brain.
We know this now from years of neuroscience research. When a child is exposed to severe, prolonged stress, without an adult helping them cope, it literally disrupts the architecture of their brain as it's being built. The parts of the brain responsible for managing stress, for reason, for emotional control, they can be physically changed by this experience. It's not just in their head, it's in their biology.
And this chart right here shows you exactly what that looks like on a biological level. It's showing the cortisol profiles, that's our main stress hormone, for kids who've been in these chronic high-stress environments. You can see a few different patterns, but I want you to look really closely at that last bar. 63%, a staggering 63% of these kids fall into what's called the blunted and non-reactive category. What does that mean? It means their stress response system has basically been so overused that it's worn out. It just stops working properly. And that is not a sign that they're tough or resilient. It's a biological marker of severe chronic stress, and it is linked to a lifetime of struggles with things like depression and major relationship problems. Okay, so if the child is having this profound biological reaction to stress, you have to ask, what is the source of that stress? Where is all this pressure coming from? To figure that out, we have to look at the patterns of behavior that create this toxic environment for the child in the first place. And these are the behaviors you start to see. The child launches this campaign of hatred, often for reasons that seem completely trivial. They'll swear up and down, "It's my idea. Nobody told me to say this." But then you listen to them. Does that sound like a kid talking?
Are they using adult language, describing things they couldn't possibly know about? And there's this shocking, cold absence of guilt. Then, the rejection spreads like a virus to that parent's entire family. Grandparents, cousins they used to love are now seen as enemies. These aren't the signs of a child who's been genuinely hurt by a parent. These are the telltale signs of a child trapped in an impossible loyalty conflict.
You know, experts in family dynamics and even in domestic violence have a name for the parental behaviors that cause this. They call it coercive control. It's a pattern where one person systematically chips away at another person's reality, their independence, their autonomy. But in this case, it's a parent undermining their own child's mind, their memories, their feelings, forcing them to believe a false story just so they can survive in their own. So, knowing the science and knowing the source of this harm, how does the legal system look at all this? What does a path forward actually look like? For this explainer, we're going to zero in on the context of Ontario specifically.
You know, in Ontario, the law is actually very clear. The child's best interests are always priority number one, and that almost always means having a meaningful relationship with both parents. So a lot of the behaviors that create this kind of psychological harm, things like blocking parenting time, making false claims to the police, constantly trashing the other parent to the child, that's not just bad co-parenting. It's often a direct violation of family law.
And because of that, the courts in Ontario actually have a whole range of tools to deal with this. In milder cases, they might order specialized therapy to try and repair the bond. For ongoing conflict, they might bring in a parenting coordinator to manage disputes. But in the most severe, persistent cases where the psychological damage to the child is clear and ongoing, the courts have the power to take very serious steps, up to and including reversing custody to protect the child by removing them from the source of the harm.
Now, for the parent who's being rejected, this is unbelievably difficult. It goes against every single one of your instincts. I mean, how are you supposed to react when your own child is being hateful toward you? Well, the experts say the key is to become an unshakable, calm, loving presence, to maintain what they call a non-defensive stance. It means you don't get sucked into fights about the past. Instead, you just consistently, calmly provide a secure base of love, even when it's not being returned. You have to be the lighthouse in their storm.
So really, the whole point is this. When we see a child suddenly and totally reject a parent, we have to fight that urge to just write it off as a messy custody battle. The science is clear. This is a recognized, serious form of child psychological harm, and it has lifelong consequences. So the real question for all of us is, how can we, as a community, as courts, as families, get better at seeing this for what it is? And how can we respond not with judgment, but with the clarity and the courage to protect a child's most fundamental right, the right to love and be loved by both of their parents?